It's time for the Sin Bin Podcast, your home for all the latest news, analysis, and discussion around the Chicago Blackhawks and Bloomington Bison.
Let's drop the puck and get started. Welcome back. I'm Michael Eganhouse, joined by Dylan Skeen, and we are excited for you to join us for another episode. And on today's episode, the Icemen and the Ghost Pirates took on the Bison as their road trip nears its end, a surprise piece of local hockey news, and the Blackhawks are finally playing better. So Dylan, we'll start with the Bison. And what were your thoughts on the recent games?
Oh, well, I mean, I'm not super happy with this 3-game stretch. I mean, it's 2 losses and a win. However, it was an overtime loss first, so that's better. A 5-3 loss against Savannah early on was worrisome, but then you got a win, so 3 points out of a possible 6 points. I'm not going to go against it. I mean, again, out of the games you need to win, these are the ones to lose. We talked about it last week on the pod, but if you are going to lose games, I guess these are the games to lose because the upcoming schedule is going to be a lot more important, but we'll get to that in a second. Anything in particular on those 3 games you wanted to shout out? Because I caught the second Savannah one, that was the win, but other than that one, I did not catch any in the overtime loss or the 5-3 Savannah loss.
Well, I think for me, in the overtime loss one, penalties killed us. We're taking a lot. Somebody on the Facebook fan page mentioned this as well. I can't remember who it specifically was, but credit to them. But they pointed out too many men on the ice penalties the Bison are taking, and that is a huge problem because at this level that can't happen, especially when you're going into overtime. And I think if I'm correct, Matsushima had maybe at least 1, maybe 2 overtime penalties that just absolutely killed the Bison. And if they didn't get those, they probably could have won that one because they had him on the ropes.
Gotcha. Well, I will say one thing I did notice in that 2-1 overtime loss was that Austin Heidemann did record his first point with the Bison, so we were talking about that trade last time as a good depth piece, and he has an assist, so we like that for our depth pieces, the trading for future considerations. Speaking of those trades, now we've talked about those games. What about the most recent trade, Jackson Stewart to the Maine Mariners, and then also Mitchell Smith to Rapid City for future considerations, both for just those cash or future considerations? What did you think of those 2 trades?
Well, really, I think it for those 2 players, it's kind of a tough situation for them because they've been on injured reserve since, I think, December. And so, I mean, that's when you're in that position and injured for that long, it's hard because you can't really do anything to say, hey, coach, I deserve to be here. But unfortunately, hockey's a business, and there's a business side to that. So I wish those 2 players the best of luck. But yeah, it's just a tough situation for them. But
me as well. I wasn't too aware of Mitchell Smith personally, but Jackson Stewart I did see around, and he was really cool. He was someone who would jump up to forward or defense on whatever they needed to be played. So I think the Mariners are getting a real good heart and soul guy there, just for cash considerations, which is pretty good for them. But at this point, with the trades we've had most recently and getting guys like Heidemann for future considerations, I'm not gonna complain too much if Jackson Stewart leaves from a personnel standpoint. Again, we have that depth as we talked about, and what helps getting added to that depth is what happened recently with Chong-Min Lee, and boy does it feel good to have him back on the Bison, doesn't it?
Oh, it's going to be a huge boost for the Bison as he ripped up those Asian League games that he was playing in. He just had an absolute tear, so I bet his fellow countrymen enjoyed him having him back on their national team, but we sure are glad that Chong-Min Lee will be returning to the Bison, as that's going to be a huge lift to them as they are holding a playoff spot right now by 3 points. They do have 3 games more played than some of the teams that they are battling off right now, Dylan, but it's a huge lift. And it's going to be really important these next 2 games because after that, they have a gauntlet.
I had not looked at Chong-Min Lee's stats in the the Asia League yet. I just checked it while you were saying it.
It's insane.
20 points with 7 goals in 5 games. That is absolutely crazy. He's going to be on a heater when he comes back, too. I can already tell. Oh, boy, am I excited to get Chong-Min Lee back on the Bison. That's going to be fantastic.
Quick note, speaking of crazy stats, we were talking about those recent games for the Bison. Shout out to Mark Sinclair in that last game, the 3-2 win, because if I remember correct, I don't remember the exact number, but they set a record shots, the Ghost Pirates did, and Sinclair stood on his head.
I saw something from, I follow Andy Zilch on Twitter, and I saw him post that they had like a record amount of shots in the second period, and it's still counting, and then something about there being 51 shots, and it wasn't over yet, and I'm like, holy cow. Like, I was watching that's what made me tune into the last little bit of that game, because I was like, I watched the beginning of it, and then I turned it off because I had to go work around the house for a little bit, and then I checked my Twitter, and I see 51 shots. Like, excuse me? So I had to turn it back on. Just wow, what a performance. There's a reason he's the all-star. You know, there's a reason. There is a reason Mark Sinclair was the Bloomington Bison all-star. That's about it. Talking about standings now. Talking about team standings. Where do you see this team at right now?
Well, I think right now, I mean, they're holding that playoff spot. So, I mean, that's a positive.
Yes.
But like I said, they're only holding that playoff spot by 3 points, and they have 3 more games played than the teams around them. And I think that's going to come to bite them possibly. But the next 2 games they have versus Cincy and Kalamazoo, in my opinion, I think are must-wins, because you got a lot of games coming up after them who you really need to win, including the Indy Fuel.
Oh yeah, we'll get to that in just a second. I want to talk about the standings in a minute, because I just checked it for myself and I didn't even realize the Heartlanders are now above the Comets in the standings. I didn't even see that. So they're battling it out for second place right now, and honestly, we're not that far behind. Like, we're 8 points from the Comets right now. That's not that bad. I mean, I expected, like, for us to do like what we did this past weekend and be like, okay, we're going to have to make up some ground over these next couple games that are really important. But honestly, not even. If the Fort Wayne Comets lost 3 in a row, which they lost 2 and 1 in overtime, the Heartlanders lost their last game, so they're only 3 points above the Comets, and they have 2 more games played than we do. So they have a ton of games played. That's not that far away, especially for when we're playing outside teams. So Bison still definitely in the mix of it, at a better position than they were off already, actually, because the Fuel were only 1 point away and then had 2 games in hand. So now we do have 3 games in hand, but we are 3 points above instead of only 1. So overall, a pretty good spot for the Bison to be at. If they can bring it into this coming next, 5 or 6 games, they should be very solid in their division, which brings us to, again, those next 4 games, 5 games. Oh man, are these ones going to be important?
It's going to be crazy important, because I think if you're head coach Philip Barsky, I mean, you're obviously looking at the teams below you, but like you said, what did you say, 8 points between us and the next team up? And so if you're Philip Barsky, I think you're telling your team, hey, let's not worry about the teams below us. Let's go catch the next team. Because if you can put yourself in a position to jump that next team and take the 3rd spot, you're going to be feeling really, really good going into that tough stretch, because then you're not going to have to worry as much about getting knocked out of a playoff spot, because then you're going to have to get knocked out by 2 spots instead of just being in that 4th spot looking down at people trying to catch up to you.
Yeah, that was the other thing, because when we last spoke, the Walleye were they had a couple games they had just won, so they were doing all right, but they weren't great in their past 10. Their current streak is 7 wins and 1 overtime loss. So the Walleye are back to being the Walleye. So it's pretty much guaranteed they're going to be the top of the division at this point. I mean, obviously, nothing is set in stone yet, but they've been playing like they're the best team in the division all year. So I absolutely agree with that. They should be fighting for that second to third spot in the playoffs. Absolutely. You get then either the Heartlanders or the Comets in the first round instead of someone like the Walleye, which the Heartlanders, personally, I would absolutely pay to see a Heartlanders Bison first round matchup. Woo, buddy. That'd be like some of those like Calgary Edmonton like Battle of Alberta games that I watched. I mean, that'd be a really good rivalry first round matchup. I hope that happens, but the Comets would also be much more formidable for the Bison comparatively to the Walleye. They've played with the Walleye pretty well, but the Walleye are clearly on another level, and that's not even anything against the Bison. The Walleye are, one of the top teams in the entire league. So, yeah, I would absolutely agree. Fighting for that second or third spot, and it's not too far off. Obviously, you still have to worry about those teams behind you, but coming into these next two games, they are going to be against the Heartlanders and then against the Cincinnati Cyclones, and those are going to be pretty darn important. I mean, those are... Again, we just talked about the rivalry between the Heartlanders. That's incredibly big piece here. And if they can steal a win at their home barn, that is nothing to scoff at. You then have a game against the Cincinnati Cyclones. And again, we already talked about them being below them in the standings. So, yes, they are about 4 points out. But at the same time... Yeah, they also have 2 more games played, I think. I'll look at the standings really quick. But yes, they have 1 more game played than us, and they are... Sorry, I was thinking of the Fuel. They were 7 points down from us in the division standings. So, I don't know. It's still important to be wary of those teams that are below you, but as you just said, it's more important to look at those teams above you. And at this point, you have to put the Cyclones in the dust. At this point in the season, that would be a devastating loss to have them gain 2 points and you lose 1. Again, it is 7 points. They have a game in hand, or we have a game in hand, but still, it's not the end of the season yet. You still got to win those in-division games, and then you get to the Walleye. I mean, these next coming games are absolutely big. And what's after the Walleye, Mike?
It should be the Indy Fuel, I believe.
Yes.
And, you talk about a crazy group of games, and Dylan, you can double check me on this. I believe that the Bison will have 4 straight games against the Fuel. And guys, if you don't have tickets to those Indy Fuel games, go get some now, because that stretch of games will decide a lot of things in the playoffs.
Honestly, Bison ticket office, hit us up for sales reps. We're just doing this for free at this point. But no, absolutely, those Indy Fuel games are going to be the most important. I did actually slip up a little bit, so that first game isn't against the Heartlanders; it's against the Kalamazoo Wings. But again, same deal you have with the Cincinnati Cyclones. There, you need to win both of those games. That's February 14th and 15th. Those are just you got to win those games against lower tier opponents, and then another big one at home against the Walleye. It'd be a statement win if you can beat the Walleye right now this far into the season while they're on a heater. That it's going to be big. Then it's the Heartlanders game on the 19th, and that's right before the 4-game stretch against the Fuel. And again, this is not only a team that's I want to say rival in slumber, because there's so many things. We talked about it last week. There's so many things about this team that would make a perfect rival for the Bison. So it's most likely going to happen sometime. And if I had to bet, I'd put all of my money on Red. Red being that this 4-game stretch is going to jumpstart the rivalry there, because any 4-game, it's a mini playoff series late in the season for the person you're closest to in the standings for the last playoff spot. That's going to be a massive series of games, and the Bison have home advantage as they have 3 in a row at home. So, Bison, you have the home court advantage, or home ice advantage, I should say. You have the home ice advantage. You have 4 games up. This is late in the season. It's put up or shut up. Those 4 games are put up or shut up. These coming 2 are big. And we talked about this exact same stretch last week, but it's important to reiterate how important that 4-game stretch is going to be for the Bison.
And this is where you find out what your team is made of.
Oh, absolutely.
With those 4 games. So the Bison are going to find out real quickly whether, they're up to the task or not. And hopefully they are up to the task against the Indy Fuel. And we talk about all these other teams, Dylan. In your opinion, if you're a Bison fan and let's say, we get to the end of the season and our playoff chances of getting in the playoffs, we're done and we have nothing else that we can do.
We're out. Okay.
And it's up to the other teams to get us into the playoffs. Who should Bison fans root for other than us?
So, which teams would we want to win
comparatively? Right, which teams should we root for to win and lose if it came down to a situation where we needed teams to win or lose to get us into the playoffs?
Well, if we were in the final stretch, and the playoffs are pretty similar to how they are now, you would want to root for the Walleye in any division game, for sure. Because they're going to be at the top of the division. Again, that's not guaranteed, but at this late in the season with how they're playing, it would be a shocker to see anybody else at the top of the division at the end of the year. So you want the Walleye to beat anybody else in division. If it's that late in the season, probably the Wings and the Cyclones as well, because again, if they're in a similar spot than they are now, then they're not going to reach the playoffs. They're 6th and 7th. You want them. Who you want to lose are those teams that are a lot closer. So I do envision the Heartlanders and Comets being a little bit closer to the Bison by the end of the season. So the one you want to lose the most is the Fuel, for sure. You want the Fuel to lose the most because they're the ones that are closest to us in the standing and have the most likelihood of overtaking us and kicking us out of a playoff spot. If we're out of a playoff spot, that most likely means that the Fuel are in 4th. So we want them to be kicked out of the playoffs. So you're going to root for, again, Cyclones, Walleye, and Wings. But you probably don't want to root for the Comets or Heartlanders just because, Heartlanders because why would you ever want to root for the Heartlanders? But Comets because they're right there in that second spot. So they could fall out possibly if they lose enough. It depends. I don't see it happening, but anything is possible, though we are about 42 to 47 games into the season, so we're not necessarily near the beginning. But again, I would say absolutely, if we're near the end of the season and the playoffs are in a similar spot, just root against the Fuel. That's the biggest thing. If the Fuel lose, we should be okay. Even right now, if we're taking it right now for the end of the season, if there's one team you need to want to lose, it's going to have to be the Fuel, because it's the ones that are closest to us in our division. I mean, the Wings are an entire 10 points back of us right now, so it's not crazy for them to overtake us. They do have 2 games in hand, but I would be shocked if they do, especially with how they've been playing recently. The Cyclones, I doubt it as well. Again, both of those teams are solid, but they're not that great, and they have a bad win-loss record at this point. So it's basically just the Fuel. That's what I would say. Personally, it's the Fuel. Looking at it, I think that might be it for the Bison right now. It's about 20 minutes in. So that's going to be it for your Bison segment today. We're going to move on, but we have our special story in the wings here, Michael. So we both here in Bloomington Normal is where this podcast is shot, which also happens to be the hometown, or I should say college town, for Illinois State University.
Go Birds.
Roll Birds. And the ISU hockey team, their coach, actually follows this podcast. So we thought we might as well give a little shout out to ISU Division I, Division II, and Division III hockey. Specifically, their Division I team did fantastic over this past weekend. A 6-1 and 7-1 win over NIU. I'm not going to say that Northern Illinois is necessarily known as a powerhouse in hockey. They're a little bit of an easier team, but that doesn't excuse a 6-1 and 7-1 win. Those are big wins over another college program. So shout out to Division I ISU for laying the smackdown on NIU. They're only 5 points behind the Fighting Illini, which another rival for them. Or not that NIU is really a rival. It's more of Maryville and Illinois, but Yeah, only 5 points behind their next opponent. They're pretty good so far. What would you say, Michael?
Yeah, I mean, following them super closely last year, and I'm sure just based on the standings and everything, I'm sure that they would say that it's a down year for them this year. Not to say that they're having a terrible year. They're still having a very good year. But compared to past years, it's a down year. But they're finding their strides and certainly dominating, like you said, the teams that they should dominate in NIU. And it should be a good series with the Illini coming up, their next opponent. Those are always great games to go to.
Just like what we were talking about with the upcoming Indy Fuel and Bison games, a person that you're trying to fight for in the playoff standings, and now you get a 2-game match against them. What could be better? That's the most exciting hockey you can watch, is ones that are for playoff seeding. So that's big for D1. Again, big shout out to them. Division 2 had their playoffs, or the start of their playoffs this weekend. Well, I would say start if they unfortunately didn't lose to Mizzou in Game 1, 4-3. Their weekend, and I'm pretty sure their season is over. That's what I've been seeing. So that's unfortunate for D2. I know a couple guys on that team. So all respect out to D2 as well. You guys were killing it. 4-3 is not a game to be ashamed of, to be eliminated in. Trust me, I've been in much more embarrassing losses than a 4-3 way to go out. Trust me. Division 3 had 2 losses this weekend as well to Missouri State, 6-3 and 6-1. So a little bit more frustrating than for D2 and for D3. But D1 with 2 big wins, and they're D1, so I guess that matters the most. But I will also give a shout out to my team, the Illinois State roller hockey team. I was a player and coach for that team for the past 3 years before I graduated this past year. And they've bbeen doing good this year. They're, I think I wrote it down over there, I'm pretty sure. I think they're 10-7-1 overall and 5-4-1 when it comes to teams that are in their division. So a pretty solid season, but this past weekend for them was big. It was in Manchester, Missouri, 4 games. They were at Purdue, Lindenwood Black, Purdue's AA team, and Maryville. The AA teams normally are a little bit easier. It depends, unless you're Lindenwood Black and you are absolutely ridiculous with all of your teams. So that was the only team they lost to this past weekend. Lost 6-3 to Lindenwood Black, but beat Purdue 8-3. And both Purdue, which was shocking, Purdue managed to do it. So shout out to Purdue roller hockey. Nice job. But both Purdue and Illinois State beat Maryville. They were undefeated going into this tournament on February 8th. 12-0 this year. And now they are no longer undefeated, as they lost to both Purdue and Illinois State. The first time this year Illinois State has beaten their rival Maryville. Not only that, but they have had some close games in the past. Their last game against Maryville was a 4-5 overtime heartbreaker loss. Ooh. So absolutely brutal for that one, but they come back. Big 4-3 win over Maryville. That is absolutely massive to see. So shout out Illinois State roller hockey. I will be there for regionals. So
you know what they say, don't, right?
What do they say?
Fear the bird, baby.
Fear the bird, baby. Roll birds, baby. Roll birds. Let's go.
I do have 2 quick shout-outs I want to mention. I forgot to mention when talking about Division 1. But Brendan Donovan, my good buddy, starting goalie. You're killing it, man. Proud of you. And then, unfortunately, there was a incident in one of their games. I believe it was maybe a week ago or 2 weeks ago in Iowa State.
I did hear about that.
It was just a scary incident, but all sounds to be well with that ISU player. So prayers up to him and really just everyone involved in that. So we send our thoughts and condolences
absolutely
for that scary incident, but glad to hear everything is going well.
Yeah, I heard from a couple of different sources that the parties involved are all okay. So that's the most important thing. We love to hear that. Again, as our last little recap, D1 killing it, D2 unfortunate loss in the playoffs, and D3 not doing as well. ISU roller hockey doing fantastically in their past tournament, beating Maryville for the first time. I mean, I can just show this to you. Look at this win-loss record. I mean, it's all wins. and then you have 2 losses at the very end to Purdue and none other than Illinois State roller hockey. Let's go. Great win over Maryville. I was unbelievably hyped when I saw that this weekend. Just fantastic for them. Cannot be happy enough for that team. Doing well and going into regionals on the 22nd. They should be good, and I'll be there as well.
There we go. So that's it for our
little stop at the Illinois State hockey teams there. Transitioning into a higher level when we go to the Blackhawks. Mike, what did you think of the past week for the Blackhawks?
Well, we saw I shouldn't say a couple. We saw a win, but you know what? It was a darn good one because it was a 6-2 win against the Preds. And then their most recent game against the Blues, a 6-5 shootout loss. If you didn't watch that game, well, you missed out because that was insane. But overall, I think this was better hockey than I've seen. They've certainly put up a fight. I mean, I wish we could have won that game against the Blues and pulled it out. But I think overall, it was a pretty good stretch for them with a couple of players heating up, especially Ryan Donato. 4-game point streak. But overall, I think
4 points in the Nashville game. I mean, it's his career high of points in a game. 2 goals, 2 assists. Big against the Trashville Predators. We're going to get into this now. Since we have some extra time, we're getting into this now. I cannot stand the Nashville Predators. I know that the Blues are the Hawks' biggest rival, and they're definitely my second least favorite, but I cannot stand the Nashville Predators.
You dislike the Predators more than you dislike the Blues?
Yes. I dislike the Predators more. Everything about them for me. I can't stand their mustard spilled in the washing machine looking jerseys. I can't stand their constant, they have a New York-esque annoying fan base where they're all in Memphis. They're not Memphis. They're all in Nashville. So, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of Nashville as a place either, but I know a ton of people are. Yeah, I'm not. Well, I'm also not a big country guy, so that kind of sails right over me. Gotcha. Well, for me, I'm not a huge fan of the place, and then I also just everything about the team. They're annoying fans. They're terrible jerseys. I will say, though, they do have a good logo. I will give them props where it's deserved. The Nashville Predators have a pretty darn good logo. I just don't like their colors. I don't like their fans. I don't like the style of play that team has adopted over their history. I don't like it. I'm still triggered from 2017 Nashville yelling that Crawford sucks during the playoff sweep. Yes, I am still aggro, still salty about that. Hey, Trashville fans, in my mentions, I'm open. Come on, send them. I'm willing to take them. I cannot stand Nashville. Oh my gosh. Okay, mini rant over. Back to the Blackhawks. Again, they had three games played, but got points in all 3 of them, and that's something that I don't know the last time I'd have been able to say about this Hawks team. So even though there was 2 losses, I'll take a shootout loss and an overtime loss along with a massive win over my least favorite team, who was, by the way, brief continuation. Weren't you guys supposed to be contenders this year? What happened? What happened? Why are you guys near us in the standings? Why are you losing to the 2024-25 Chicago Blackhawks? I thought you were a cup contender. What happened?
Maybe the worst Blackhawks team we've ever seen, too.
No, last year was most definitely worse. And the year before that. I would have to say, easy. I'm sorry. There's been some bad parts this year, but as we were talking about last week a little bit with their 6-point improvement since they were last year, they are better than they were last year. And you watched the season before they got Bedard, right? You watched that last season?
I did. Maybe I'll retract my statement and not the worst team, one of the worst teams. How about that?
Yes, I'll post that. But you also got to remember there was some pretty brutal teams in the early 2000s too for the Hawks. I mean, once they got rid of Chelios and Roenick and Belfour and everyone, they were really
that's fair.
They were straight cheeks for a while. So I mean, I don't know if it's one of the absolute worst, but not a good season. Absolutely. But the 4-3 Oilers loss, I was keeping track of that as that game was going. That one, just a brutal like penalty in OT against like the best team on the power play. You just can't.
And you can't do that.
Can't do it. You can't. It can't happen at that point. I mean, I get it. It was, what was it? I think it was Teuvo Teravainen stepped on and then touched the puck too early and it got a too many men. It was.
Yeah.
I mean, he was so good that game too. Teuvo was absolutely lights out that game too. It's unfortunate that that's how it ended. But again, against the top 5 team in the league right now, because the Oilers are a top 5 team in the league right now, and I would say undoubtedly have the best power play in the league. I would say I'll take that. I'll take a 4-3 overtime loss against that.
I think that's something that you have to keep in perspective because, I mean, we're going through growing pains not only with skill level, but, I mean, part of getting a championship caliber team is learning how to win those games. I mean, you look at, like you said, we're keeping in these games with these top tier teams in the league in the standings, but the next piece that we're going to have to look for is this team is going to learn how to have to win those games.
Yeah.
You can't just keep keeping yourself in them. Correct. You got to learn how to get over the hump and win them, and the Hawks, they're just not there yet.
Well, that's why I'm much more progressed by this year, or like I have a much better feeling after watching this year compared to other years, because you're right, it feels harder to watch because there's a lot more heartbreaking losses where it's like OT or like really close game and you almost made a comeback or something like that, like a ton of games that are like that. But the reason why it felt easier in the past couple of years is because we were just getting blown out 6-2 every game.
That's
like,
a very good point.
You're getting blown out and you have a couple close ones, then you have a surprise win here or there, and then you continue the cycle. Like this year, it's actually like most games, there have been a few stretches where we've played really badly and gotten blown out. I'm not going to pretend like we haven't, but we've also had stretches like this where we play really well and like are in a lot of games. And that's not something I can say we had long stretches for in the past 2 years. So it's progression. It's not perfect, but it's progression. The only times we ever went on like winning streaks or anything like that in past years is like at the very end of seasons or like just very small portions. Here it actually seems like, you know, they're way closer to being in games. They just need those extra pieces. And again, we talked about a little bit in our first episode, those prospects. Just be patient. They're coming up, but you just got to wait because it's going to be a few years until these guys are NHL regulars. Again, Frank Nazar is only 21. Like, he's young. All right, and he's already basically playing second, third line center on an NHL team. Like, he's only going to get better in the next 2 years. Thinking about these guys that are going to come up, I'll talk about Nick Lardis again later in my prospect talk when we're wrapping up, but he's still killing it. I mean, you have a ton of prospects in this cupboard that are going to make this team a lot better. You just got to wait for them to actually start growing up through the pipeline and getting there. Quick shout out here we have over the past week, Patrick Kane became the league leader in shootout goals in the history of the NHL.
Patty Kane, we love you, bro.
Oh, absolutely. Nothing but respect. Got the Kaner jersey right there on the wall. So yeah, absolutely. Nothing but love to Patty Kane. And of course, he deserves that shootout goal. I mean, as for watching Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane over the past, I guess it ended 3 years ago, but over the past 10 years before that, like, I mean, Patrick Kane was always the better one on the shootout. Like, Toews had the better numbers, but like,
I believe he has. Toews might have the best percentage, I think
he does have the best percentage.
He's got the best percentage, but nobody can stop Kane.
Yeah.
Nobody.
Kane on in shootouts is just, like, even when he fails, it's because he's trying something that's, like, too complicated or something like that. He's so fun to watch in the shootout. Always has been. Don't make me pull up that Minnesota Wild clip.
Like, I was just about to say, I feel like it makes it even better that he got that, because ever since he pulled that move out in Minnesota, I can remember, I think I can count it on one hand the amount of times that he hasn't scored on that move. Like, since he pulled that move out, he does it almost every time, and they still can't stop it. And they know it's coming.
Yeah. No, that specific move has just inspired a lot. I mean, because that clip is insane. I mean, it's like, think of the Das Stew that was done on us, like, on the Hawks. Like, the classic flip over Antiniemi's glove. Like, everybody knows that move. And a bunch of people try that move. People still do it, like, in the modern NHL, because it was just that good of a move, and they're trying to replicate that insane one. That's what Patty Kane did with that one. I mean, literally look at earlier this year in the LA Kings game with Ryan Donato. You remember when Ryan Donato pulled the exact same move, and everybody was like, that looks pretty familiar.
Sorry, Donato, but you are not Patrick Kane, unfortunately. But
the good news is nobody else is either.
I give you props for trying it, but yeah, nobody else is Patrick Kane, so unfortunately that will hamper a lot of other people's
Funny
attempts.
enough, Donato's basically our Patrick Kane this year. If you're talking, if you think of Bedard as our Johnny Tays, I think Donato is probably our number 2 offensive producer, which is crazy to say, but I don't know. That 2025 Chicago Blackhawks, Ryan Donato, top tier player, man.
That's
absolutely nuts.
That's a good segue because we're going to be talking about. We talked about other trades last week. And talking about trade bait, there's been some rumors with Donato because he's heating up, but also Seth Jones, who I think we all know my feelings on Seth Jones. I won't go down that road.
He's very happy about it, I'm sure, on being on the trade bait board. But
who do you see getting traded? We'll go. Who do you see getting traded first, and who do you think makes more sense for a in-season trade versus a off-season move?
Okay, well, I see a couple guys. I mean, at this point when you're looking at it, there's not a ton of guys that I would trade right now. Even people that I would say dark horses in the earlier season, I wouldn't say are really trade bait now. Like in the early season, I love him. He's one of my favorite players on the team. I literally have a signed jersey in the back there. But Lucas Reichel, I thought in the early season he might get traded, just needing a change of scenery. But now he's starting to click a little bit. He's about a point every 3 games. He's not perfect, but he's developing slowly but surely. And at that point, why mess up progress? He's making progress. Unless he takes a step back at this point, I would just say, hey, he's still progressing. That's positive. And he's not terrible defensively. Put him down the lineup, a third a point a game player down the lineup that's solid defensively. I'll take that. So I think Lucas Reichel's carving out a pretty solid role. I wouldn't say he's on the trade block really at this point. The biggest 3 on the Hawks right now, I would say, on the trade block: Seth Jones, Ryan Donato, Alec Martinez. Those would be my 3. And actually TSN, the Toronto Sports Network, releases their trade bait board every year before the March 7th trade deadline. And this year, 2 of those guys are on it, and relatively high too. Seth Jones is number 7.
He should be higher
on that list.
He should be higher.
No, you just want him traded.
Okay, you're right.
Exactly.
Okay, you're right.
Exactly. But Seth Jones, number 7 on the trade bait board right now, and Ryan Donato, number 11. And funnily enough, Connor Murphy, number 27 on that list. That one kind of shocked me because I've also met Connor Murphy. He's an awesome dude, so I don't really want to see him go a little bit. But Alec Martinez feels like the move that would make more sense. Like he's older, yeah, by a good amount of years. So I guess maybe if you want them better youth and more age, a better age to compete in the playoffs. But Alec Martinez is that vet. He's the bottom pair defenseman that any team would probably want. He hasn't been amazing with the Hawks this year, but again, it's kind of hard to be. So I don't blame him too much. But Seth Jones, Ryan Donato, I mean, it's entirely at this point, I think it's what are teams going to give you? Because we said it a little bit last week. I don't really want to trade Ryan Donato if somebody is just going to give me a second round pick even. At this point in the season, I won't even accept a second round pick. His value is that high right now. I would say Ryan Donato and another small piece, maybe you throw in Ryan Donato, Alec Martinez, and a third round, and the Blackhawks own third round pick for a first round pick or something like that.
Really?
At this point, Ryan Donato has 32 points in 51 games, playing on the 2025 Chicago Blackhawks. This is very impressive at this point. He's never been this kind of player. He's a big thing that nobody ever mentions. He's a center. He can play any position on forward. He can play center, left wing, or right wing. He's done it for the Hawks this year, and that kind of versatility is invaluable, specifically in playoff teams that are looking to add in my opinion, if you're building a playoff team, you build through the trade deadline your bottom six and your bottom pair Ds and defense and stuff like that. Because if you're a really good team, you should already have that chemistry and clicking before the trade deadline. Yes, there are trade deadline moves that have worked out amazingly, but think of all the teams that really won the cup and what their trade deadline moves were. The biggest ones I think of are the Lightning, and they always added to their bottom six. They never messed with their top six because they had Steven Stamkos, they had Nikita Kucherov, they had all these guys. They always added to their bottom six and had that better because if the top players are producing, why mess with that? Right. And that's kind of what I got with Boston when they lost in 2023. They spent a bunch of money for Tyler Bertuzzi and threw him in their top six, and he actually worked really well in their top six too. The problem was they kind of just messed with what they already had a little bit. And I truly think sometimes adding a major player at the deadline actually hurts the team because you're messing with chemistry and people that have been playing together for almost an entire year, and now you're throwing another top player and just expecting him to mesh well. Personally, I'm much more of you get your players who are your top performers in the draft and in free agency if you need to, and then you mess with your bottom six at the trade deadline. That's why I think Ryan Donato is as valuable as he is, because he's not a top-line player, but he is doing fantastic as that bottom of the lineup player. And those guys having great seasons at prime age, he's 28. He's in his prime right now. You get someone in their prime who's perfect age for the playoffs. 28, he's not in his 30s yet, but he's just right in his prime, as we said. And someone who's putting up 32 points in 51 games on a terrible team, who is on the forecheck. He's a perfect bottom sixer for a competitor. So at this point, if someone's coming up to the Hawks, I'm saying, yeah, I'll add more things into the deal, but if you want Ryan Donato, it's got to be worth my while. It's got to be a first-round pick. Obviously, we'll throw things in because I don't think Ryan Donato by himself is worth a first-round pick. But, honestly, I don't know. Brandon Hagel fetched 2 first-round picks and 2 technical prospects when he was traded. Now, Brandon Hagel was also an up-and-coming NHLer who now is a point-per-game player, and he's incredibly hard on the forecheck, one of the most valuable players in the entire league, in my opinion, now playing for Canada at 4 Nations. So big whoop to former Blackhawk Brandon Hagel, whoop whoop. But I'm not saying he's as valuable as Brandon Hagel because it's a completely different situation.
Right.
But I am saying that if that's worth 2 first-round picks, this value, he's only at $2 million. If the Hawks retain, he's worth like a $1 million. That's basically adding nothing to your salary cap because most base level contracts are about $750,000 to $800,000. All right. So if you retain half, which wouldn't be crazy, you're retaining $1 million for the rest of the season. That'd be pretty reasonable. You could give him to a contender for barely over minimum. So if I'm a contender, I'm saying, yeah, I would pay a first-round pick to add a perfect piece to my bottom 6. But it entirely depends. The value of first-round picks, especially late first-round picks, can be debated anyway. That's part of the reason why, because if you're a contender, you're going to the playoffs, your pick is going to be relatively high. It's going to be probably in the mid to late 20s at least. So why would, that's not even as valuable. I'm saying, for a Ryan Donato, who's, yes, for only 1 more year, but is going to guarantee adding good production to your team, I absolutely think that's worth a first-round pick at this point. And
it's kind of, I think I mentioned this on the last episode with the kind of free agency, but, if a team wants you that bad, they'll give you that. So that totally makes sense. They're gonna give you what you want if they want the player that bad.
The biggest thing is multiple teams wanting the player that bad, because then you get in a bidding war, and that's how you get major pieces.
Drive the price up.
Exactly. That's how you get major pieces for something like that. So, again, Barclay Goodrow went for a first-round pick. Yes, that was crazy, but, if Barclay Goodrow can go for a first-round pick, why can't Ryan Donato go for a first-rounder and, some extra pieces added in? I don't see why you can't do that. I'm going to pull up the NHL standings right now, and I'll look at a few teams, and I'll see who could use Ryan Donato. Because I think really anybody could use Ryan Donato. But you look at the top ones. I don't know about the Jets as much because they have pretty solid depth. But looking at purely by points, not even point percentage, but like, think of the Oilers. Think of the Oilers, Alec Martinez and Ryan Donato on their team. That team always needs depth. They had a bunch of signings this past offseason that were supposed to make it perfect because Jeff Skinner was going to be a top 6 guy and be fantastic. I was one of those people that was preaching that Jeff Skinner was going to be amazing. I didn't think he was going to fail at all in Edmonton. I thought he was going to be amazing, and he has been meh. Victor Arvidsson, meh. Like, these are pretty good players, but I'm saying you want a good bottom 6. You don't want to mess with your top 6 and your power play of Zach Hyman and Leon Draisaitl and Connor McDavid. That's the most unstoppable in the entire league. You want to add depth pieces, and you add Ryan Donato and you add Alec Martinez. I think that would work. Plus, you have a little bit of an in because their GM is the horrid, wretched Stan Bowman. So if you can get over calling him the horrid, wretched Stan Bowman, you can trade with him pretty well, probably. So I don't know. It's something to keep a track of. Also, something I didn't even realize on how far the Washington Capitals and Winnipeg Jets are above everybody else in the league. Right now, most teams are at about 55 to 56 games played. The Winnipeg Jets and the Washington Capitals are at 81 and 80, respectively. The third best in the entire league is at 72.
Wow.
So, solid lead for those two teams. Definitely making it big. And not only that, but there are 3 Central Division teams in the top 8. So, jeez. Central. And there's 2 in the top 3 as well, because the Dallas Stars are now 3rd in the league. And also, they're 3rd in the league while having Miro Heiskanen on injured reserve, which is insane, because it's Miro Heiskanen, a top 5 defenseman in the league. But I'll get over myself. Finally, that was talking about Ryan Donato, how good he could be. That's someone that's this trade deadline. That's not going to get traded in the offseason. Ryan Donato, if he's getting traded, it's going to be this deadline. And honestly, I heard rumors that a lot of stuff was going to go down during the Four Nations face-off break. So that's starting right now. So you might see some deals get done in the next week and a half. At least that's what the rumors have been swirling around. But now that I've talked about Ryan Donato, I'll talk about the other one, which I know you want me to, Seth Jones. However, if Seth Jones gets traded, I'm not saying it's not a possibility. Mm-hmm. Again, if we're talking about teams I think he would go to, I've been saying this since the beginning of the season. If he's getting traded, it's going to be Dallas. I think easily it's going to be Dallas, because they don't necessarily have a ton of cap space. Let me look at Puckpedia. I'm going to use their cap space things so I can see exactly how much cap space. Yeah, Stars are one of the ones that are closest to the cap. So they're going to have a harder time on taking on a big contract like Seth Jones. However, they also have Ilya Lyubushkin at $3.25 million over the next 3 years. They also have Matt Dumba at $3.75 million. And I'm going to be honest, I kind of thought both of those were bad deals when they were signed, so I don't think they're great deals now. Now, let's say Matt Dumba, because I would say that Seth Jones is probably just a better version of Matt Dumba in general. So, let's say Matt Dumba, that's almost $4 million off the cap, but you still need to get the rest of that done. So my guess is there probably would need to throw in another piece. I mean, maybe someone like Evgeny Dodonov for just $2 million, but he's been pretty good this year. Maybe you throw in someone like Mason Marchment, but I think he's a pretty valuable piece for that team. I think they'd kind of struggle with letting him go, and if they did let him go, I think they'd be more questioning. I don't know. Well, the thing is, it was also, I was so high on them trading for it before they acquired Cody Ceci and Mikael Granlund, because they do have a lot on injured reserve right now, but they just got Granlund and Cody Ceci. So that does make it a little bit hard. I'm looking at it right now, and their current cap space is about $5.5 million because of their injured reserve, which is Miro Heiskanen and, again, Sorry, that their frontline forward who is on injured reserve, Tyler Seguin. Thank you. Their highest paid forward, Tyler Seguin, also on injured reserve. So they do have about $5.5 million. So again, if you give up that Matt Dumba contract, that does, in theory, let's say the Hawks carry $3 million. I mean, that's a lot for the next 6 years. But let's say they retain $3 million, especially with the cap going up in soon years. They retain that. Seth Jones is now only at $6.5 million. That's a pretty darn reasonable price, I'd say. And then you take on a contract like Lyubushkin or Matt Dumba, and suddenly that falls under their cap space. Now, that's the only person I think it would work if it's going to happen before the deadline. I don't think it's going to happen at the deadline. I think Seth Jones is definitely going to be on the Hawks past the deadline. If I would be fine with being shocked, I think there'd be a good return if that were to happen, because there'd be, again, retention, and there would be Seth Jones going the other way, and he's not regarded as like a bad player across the league, at least by general managers comparatively to the fans. I know a ton of them don't like Seth Jones, but if it's going to happen for me, I'd have to say it's more likely in the offseason.
If you're Kyle Davidson and you're looking at Seth Jones' contract, what is the maximum amount of money that you're willing to retain on that?
I don't know what the maximum would be because I don't know what the return is yet. The most you can possibly keep, retain, would be about $4.7 million. All right, because he has a $9.5 million contract. I don't think the Hawks at all want to retain that much of his contract because that's a lot. However, it depends on what the return is. I wouldn't keep $4.5 million in cap for a lot of things. You'd have to really add a sweetener to the deal for that. But that's why I'm saying, like, retaining $3 million with the cap going up, that's a lot of money, and I really don't want to do it, but
it doesn't hurt you too bad if it's going to keep going
It's
up.
not as bad. It's bad, but it's not as bad. Mm-hmm. And it depends. I mean, if there is a first-round pick and a good prospect going the other way, yeah. I mean, Dallas has an abundance of those kind of players. I mean, think of, like, Maverick Bork. I really like Maverick Bork. I think he's going to be pretty good. It's his rookie year. I don't think they'd give up Maverick Bork, but I'm saying, like, they have a lot of pieces to get stuff done. Mm-hmm. And I think if we're retaining salary, that's the biggest thing here, is retaining salary for that many years, even if the cap is going up. Retaining salary for that long is no small feat. That is something that's going to have to be compensated. And that is going to be whether it's first-round picks, whether it's prospects, I don't care. Just, if we're trading Seth Jones, someone of the caliber of Seth Jones, and we're retaining $3 million, let's say, on that deal, that's a lot. It's a lot of money for 6 more years, or I should say 5 more years.
That's why you never should have been signed in the first place.
That's more Stan Bowman. But, again,
I digress.
Yes, we regress on Stan Bowman. But my mind's just going blank because I'm not sure of who else Jones would really go to. And I think it's really going to happen in the offseason. I would really, really, really not be surprised to see Matt Dumba for Seth Jones and Matt Dumba and a first and a prospect for Seth Jones in the offseason. I would not be surprised if that is the exact deal. So I'm marking it down now. I'm having good feelings. I was at the Belmont Bradley game for basketball recently, and someone was asking me before the game what I thought the score was going to be, and I said, I don't know, I just got this gut feeling it's going to be Belmont by 3. And everyone was like, what are you talking about? Bradley's going to win this game. Belmont won by 3.
We got a fortune teller on our podcast, guys.
I was losing it, and I'm like, you know what? I got to just start trusting my gut more often because that was crazy. And my gut's telling me Matt Dumba and a first and a prospect for Seth Jones. I think that just makes so much sense. But Kyle Davidson, there has been word that NHL GMs don't often, but will sometimes see trades proposed on social media and go, you know what? That's a good idea. And try to make it happen. So Kyle Davidson,
that's insane.
You heard me. Matt Dumba for Seth Jones and a bunch of picks. I don't really think Dallas is gonna give up that much. Honestly, I really don't think it's gonna happen. But I can dream. All right, finally,
I wouldn't care who he gets traded for, but
of course you
again.
wouldn't. Of course you wouldn't. You have your own opinions on Seth Jones. We can move past that. Last part of the podcast for tonight, we'll have our weekly prospect talk, and as promised, we're talking again about Nick Lardis, baby. Oh man, is this guy gonna be so fun? I keep seeing everywhere it's like, man, it's only the OHL. Stop like hyping this kid up. It's just like an OHL guy. Plenty of these guys don't score in the next level. I'm like, yes, but you gotta watch this kid play. All right, he's different. All right, you're talking about my gut feelings. We're just talking about that. I had a gut feeling about Nick Lardis before he was a Blackhawk. All right, I was hyping him up. I wanted the Hawks to take him in the second round in 2023. I was that high on this guy. Now, did I think he was going to become this? Not necessarily, but like he's been very, very good, and I get to put on my catharsis hat for Nick Lardis because I knew it. But Nick Lardis, again, been killing it. When we talked last, he had just scored 4 goals in a game and was up to 48 goals in 47 games. Well, guess what? He had 3 more games. And guess what? He has 3 more goals. Or sorry, I think it was 48 and 47 when we last talked. So he has 4 more goals in 3 more games. He has 52 goals in 50 games now, which he broke 2 separate records over this past week. The first one, he is one of only 8 players since the year 2000 to have scored 50 goals in under 50 games. Those other players, Nick Robertson in 1920, Dane Fox in 13-14, John Tavares in 06-07, Brett McLean in 07-08, I think that's Fellhaber in 18-19, a little guy you may know called Patrick Kane.
Yes, sir.
In 06-07, Randy Rowe in 2000 and the 2001 season, and finally Nick Lardis this year. Only 8 people since the year 2000 to have scored for 50 in 50 or less, and Nick Lardis is a part of that group. What a group to be a part of. I mean, obviously some of these guys are not longtime NHLers. Dane Fox, Brett McLean, Randy Rowe. These guys were not here. So as they said, people do have some sort of reason to be skeptical about people scoring this much. I mean, some of them don't translate at the next level. But if you're thinking that, I just implore you, please watch this kid play a game, all right? The last goal he had for goal 52 was utterly disgusting. He gets a pass directly in the slot, and the defenseman actually makes a really good play and sticks the stick right in the lane as he's trying to shoot. So Nick Lardis toe drags around the stick, fires it past the netminder. It was absolutely gross. Nick Lardis, I just everything he does, I'm like, I mean, I don't know what you could possibly ask him to do more. He's scoring over a goal a game. That was the first record he broke, by the way. That was all I was saying. Those 50 and 50 or less, that was the first record. The second record, he has broken the Brantford Bulldogs, formerly known as the Hamilton Bulldogs. So their entire history, he has broken their goals in a season record with 52. He now has 52 and 50 with 86 points in 50 games played. And not only that, but if he continues on his current pace, he's going to also break the all-time points record for the Bulldogs that was set in 18-19 by Arthur Kaliev with 102 points in 67 games. I don't even think Nick Lardis is going to reach 67 games this year, and I think he's definitely going to break that points. I mean, he already, this season, has the 4th all-time in Bulldogs history with 86 points in 50 games. So he's already an all-time producer for this team in a season, and he's still got 15 games left probably.
Nick, we're waiting for you, buddy.
Yeah,
we'll be here when you get here.
So we're talking about, it'll get better, I promise. And like, well, who's going to come up and make this team better? Nick Lardis. Remember the name. Dude is an absolute G. I can't wait for him to be potting goals left and right in the NHL at this point in like 3 years. Honestly, I could see it in 3 years. He's potting goals constantly. That's Nick Lardis. I wouldn't be surprised. Well, that wraps it up for my prospect section, and including with that wraps up the podcast for the day perfectly timed today, 59 minutes and 30 seconds right now. So it was a little bit too specific, but still good timing right now for the podcast. So we're going to wrap it up right before it reaches an hour. Thank you so much for watching the Sin Bin podcast. It's been fun to record this one, as always. Love talking about hockey. Mike, any last-minute things you have to say?
Well, it was definitely a fun episode. If you missed any other previous episodes, make sure to go back and listen and watch those on YouTube and Spotify, as always. And if you haven't already, again, if you want to join the herd with the Bison, look up their fan page on Facebook. Spread the word to grow the herd. Go Bison, go Blackhawks.
There we go. That's a great way to end it. We'll see you guys next week.